Welcome to the Value Investor TV podcast. My name is Beko and my partner Hari. This is the podcast to help you grow your wealth and become financially independent. Value Investor TV. Welcome, everybody. Hari, it's been a tumultuous week this week.
Yep.
A lot of volatility, a lot of ups and downs, and the crazy gyration of the market. So we thought it would be very prudent to talk about how you should think about this downward trend that we're seeing, and how you should be prepared, and what the thought process might be. So we're going to talk about all those things today related to the coronavirus and the market downturn. Hari, let's start off with the disclaimer.
Yeah, so this is the Value Investor TV podcast. We are a podcast that helps you understand the concepts behind value investing. We are not a financial advisor. We don't know your specific financial situation. So before making any investment decisions, please consult with the appropriate advisor.
Sounds good. So Hari, let's start with this. Let's just start with a very broad question. How are you feeling?
Well, I feel great. So, the interesting thing about these kind of shocks, as it were, are a lot of people will tell you that they don't see them coming. At the beginning of the year, the market was kind of running on full steam. We had hit all-time highs. And, I think you and I talked about the coronavirus at the end of January. And at the time, we were thinking, this could become something significant. It's certainly certainly hurting China significantly. And now we're seeing it spread to the point where the WHO is calling it a pandemic. And we're seeing China and South Korea, which were initially targets of the virus, have been tailing off. But now other countries in Europe, especially Italy, the Middle East, Iran, are exploding in the number of cases that they've had. And so we're seeing a lot of reaction. So we're recording this in the middle of March now, 2020. And as we're finding out more travel bans are being put out by the U.S. So Donald Trump has closed travel from Europe, I think starting last night. At midnight.
Yeah, Friday midnight.
Yeah,
midnight Friday.
Sorry, Friday at midnight. Today's Sunday, and so we are seeing this travel ban affecting not just the EU, but they've expanded it to the UK and Ireland as well. Yeah. And so a lot of people are probably wondering, it's hard to judge what is going on right now. Part of that announcement was also that there's going to be a $50 billion stimulus for the economy in various ways that we haven't really fully gotten yet. And also some discussion about, maybe in the future there would be a payroll tax cut and other things like that. The thing that we, as investors, obviously, people's safety is the most important thing right now. So shutting down these things is going to, as somebody said, in order to stop this, we have to basically force ourselves into a recession, right? And that's why we're shutting down these, schools. We're shutting down travel. I was actually in Disney World like a week and a half ago.
Yeah, you're right. You were in Florida for vacation, but also for a conference which was also subsequently canceled.
Right, and so this, I think what we're seeing is, there are certain industries that are going to be hit very, very hard by this, mostly in the travel and luxury travel and, cruise ships, vacations, that kind of stuff is going to be hit. Tourism is going to be hit really, really hard because you basically, we're now starting to run into the, peak travel seasons for spring break. We're going to be hitting summer, and this may be extending into that. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on right now. And so we don't have all the answers, but we wanted to talk a lot about that and what is this going to look like for certain industries and, for the market itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. certainly the travel industry is getting hit hard. And I was in France in January and February, and that's when it was slowly trying to creep. Not it wasn't going into Europe at that time. There were probably some, but it wasn't as visible as it is today. But at the time, I was talking to the locals over there, and they were saying that the tourism is actually has started to decline starting in December, January, and February, and now I can imagine that's even the effect has been even compounded now at this point, especially given that France, I think 30% or something like that of their GDP comes from tourism. Some countries are going to get hit harder by this than others, certainly.
Right, and I think Italy is probably similar amounts, percentage-wise, their DGP is coming from tourism as well. So it's not surprising that, these countries that were already kind of on the brink of recession, that were barely skating by, like Italy, this is going to hit them very, very hard. So,
yeah. Italy, you're talking about also Spain just closed down their borders. Their population about 50 million closed their borders down completely this weekend. I heard Norway is doing the same, and I'm sure there's going to be cascade effect from all of this, not just in tourism but other industries. And this is particularly interesting in with Europe and the free movement of people and goods on that continent. And also I think some element of culture there as well, where like for example, something I noticed in France, culturally, people are very, when they greet each other, it's very intimate. It's not like here. The new topic that's been out and about is handshake. Like, how do we deal with handshakes in the U.S.? And it obviously is a vital thing of our culture to be able to greet each other through handshakes. Over there, it's even something more than that, right? So how do you deal with that in the context of coronavirus? And so there's a social element to this as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things that's coming out of this is, I was going to be at a conference that is big in the medical IT industry, worldwide conference. A lot of business gets negotiated. Business development happens at these kind of things. A lot of companies start making deals at these conferences. So it's kind of a big deal that a lot of this is being shut down. I think the ripple effect is going to be fairly significant across the world. But I'm painting this picture of doom and gloom. But I think what is actually being done right now is essentially copying the model that was done in South Korea. We're seeing that being copied in a lot of the world. The U.S. still hasn't gotten to the point where they're testing as fast as the South Koreans are. But in essence, South Korea has tested over 200,000 people. And, they have 8,000 cases of the coronavirus. And they've basically shut down. I mean, Becco's parents live in South Korea, so he can tell us about that. But they basically shut down all activity, mass gatherings, schools. Everything is basically closed. Everybody's in quarantine. And the interesting thing is, after 3 or 4 weeks, this virus is now the number of new cases is rapidly fallen, and the mortality rate is actually less than 1%. The reason I want to bring that up is there's a lot of people out there, and as value investors, we one of the things that we do is seek the truth. My day job is an epidemiologist. I have taken classes in epidemiology. I understand that. I'm a physician. I understand the science behind a lot of this. I don't want to propagate any myths about this, right? I want to be very clear and transparent. The South Korea model is, and their statistics are probably the most accurate for the mortality rate, for the infection rate, for the transmissibility, and so on. And people should be looking to it as the model for what this looks like. So, I will say this flat out. The mortality rate for this, the actual mortality rate, is probably less than 1%. And there's a lot of media hype around 3%, 4%, which is what we're seeing in Iran and Italy, and that is due to them not testing everybody. Like South Korea is. South Korea is basically testing anybody who's exposed, and that's why you're able to get accurate rates. And go ahead, Becco.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to that. The screening effort has been pretty astounding to see. I mean, my parents were pretty surprised and impressed by what the government was able to put together, this massive screening program. I also read something, obviously there are two things. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's leading the effort here from the doctor's perspective and U.S. government side, he has been saying that you got to do two things. You got to prevent new people coming into the country, but also you have to take care of people who are already sick inside the country. And so on the first note, preventing people from coming in, what South Korea has done is they have determined that, aside from a very specific countries, they have determined that it is already in the country. Therefore, blocking new people coming into the country is not going to do much help. Instead, what they have done is they have instituted this program. They have put together an application, basically a mobile application. When you come into the country, you have to download this app, and you have to report your symptoms every single day in the app. So it's a government-run application that tracks where you are. You got to put in, your symptoms on a daily basis. If you don't put in, they'll track you down and call you, and the local authorities will try to find you and things like that. But they've put together a pretty impressive system to screen a whole bunch of people and to track people who are maybe asymptomatic for the time being, but still, you should be on a short list of people to watch out for. My parents have been quite impressed, and to your point, Hari, I think a testament to that is people talking about the drive-through programs, right? The drive-through screening programs that was instituted over there. 200,000 people were screened. It is pretty impressive. One article that I read this morning talking about the whole screening program, but also it has to be coupled with a good, solid, foundational medical system, like healthcare system, public general healthcare system overall. I read somewhere in the statistic today, amount of money invested per ICU bed or something along those lines was South Korea and some other countries were quite high. If you look at Italy, it's quite low.
Yep.
And this article was talking about from the perspective of the UK, where it is even lower than Italy. So from that perspective, I think this author was talking about it from the perspective of UK is worse. People tout NHS as a good system, but there's going to be some holes here that we'll find with this virus.
Yeah, you have to remember that just because there's a pandemic doesn't mean that normal people getting sick with other conditions, congestive heart failure or pneumonia unrelated to this, aren't also happening at the same time, right? And so, when you have this kind of thing, what you're really worried about is a surge of patients beyond the capacity that we already have, right? And if you look at places like Houston has far more ICU beds than, say, a smaller city like Austin or San Antonio. And so the capacity to handle a surge of people may be dependent not just on the size of the city, but how big the response is and so on. So, I find it interesting that actually in South Korea, most of the deaths are actually related to one gathering of people.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the population that has been exposed has been relatively mild cases. And so, the other kind of interesting tidbit of this is that there was a cruise ship called the Princess Diamond cruise ship that was one of the first cases that got exposed. There were 3,700 people aboard. 16% of them, about 700 of them, got the infection, but only 300 of them were actually symptomatic. And so their mortality rate was actually very similar to what we see in South Korea, 1%. And this is a population that is skewed to the older side, right? So when we talk about these numbers, this means that there's an 8% or so symptomatic attack rate. That means that you will actually develop symptoms from this. That sounds low, right? But what you have to think about is that this virus can continue to propagate even after it's quote unquote controlled. So imagine if China opens up after they've kind of closed off Wuhan and starts opening up, and these people who are not symptomatic or had an infection kind of start going out into the world and they start infecting again. Well, they can be back at this, large spike of people again. Right. So all of this shutdown is kind of to try and defer the amount of infection that is occurring at one given time so that we don't overwhelm the system.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I was talking to a friend about this as well. People are in the U.S. and I think in other parts of the world, we're talking about flattening the curve, right? Flattening the curve.
Yep.
So instead of having a whole bunch of people get sick at one point, at which point the healthcare system can't really handle that much volume, you're trying to blunt that effect and be able to have this more elongated, kind of more rounder curve that stays below the threshold of the capacity, the healthcare capacity.
Right.
But if you extend that, if you do a little thought experiment of that, you're going to see a spike. Maybe it reaches that threshold. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it goes up. And then it's going to come down. But then at some point, it's probably going to go back up again and come down, go back up, come down, go back up, come down. Ultimately, at which point you kind of reach a steady state of, just having some certain percentage of population getting infected on a constant basis. I thought that was a kind of an interesting thought experiment to do.
Yeah, I mean, nobody knows if you are once exposed, if you become immune for life, or if you just have an immunity for a few months. So we don't know the answers to that. The virus can mutate, and that may mean that it has basically a new strain that could cause you to be get it twice, right? But it's actually a different virus in that regard. So it'll be interesting to see what if this becomes a thing that we can control with just an immune, a vaccine. My guess is that as most of these things go, as long as we are cautious about, this, we will have lead time because we'll be able to test for it. And if people are mindful of the social interaction, you will actually significantly limit this transmission, right? And, so I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I've heard hand washing can reduce the amount of transmission by 50%, right? And hopefully that means that people will also follow this, and it'll also prevent flu transmission too, just as a side effect of just hand washing and things like that. So
yeah.
Anyway, we've talked a lot about the actual virus transmission rates and so on, but I think we can now start talking more about the economic impacts and the market impacts that we see, because this isn't a podcast about epidemiology. So,
yeah, that sounds good. Okay, sounds good, Hari. Should we continue our discussion in the next episode?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks.